Hello YouTubers and bronies, this is Explicit Escritoire. Today I'm going to be doing my very first Clop-Fic reading. I was inspired to do this Clop-Fic reading by a few people who are already doing their own Clop-Fic readings. The two main ones being MindlessGonzo and MicTheMircrophone. I really enjoyed what they do, and of course their voices are pretty good. And it's just something that I enjoy listening to, so I was going to start reading them myself, to do something in my spare time as I wait for my life to go on. Today I'm going to be reading a Clop-Fic by Cadence, the Shadow Knight. All Clop-Fics that I read can be found on femfiction.net. I'll leave a link below the video, linking you to whoever I'm referencing you to in this video, and also linking you directly to the story that I'm reading, in case you want to read along or whatnot. Alright, the story that I'm going to be reading today is Cadence's Naughty Little Fetish. I have gotten permission from the writer to read their story, and they were pretty ecstatic about it. So I'm hoping I do them justice. This is Cadence's Naughty Little Fetish by Cadence the Shadow Knight. Caution: this story contains explicit scenes involving the pee fetish. There is also content involving incest, more specifically twincest. If these two things are something that bothers you, I advise you read no further. Otherwise, enjoy, and I hope you like the story. It was a beautiful day in the prosperous city of Camelot. The royal castle bustled with activity as it normally did. Princess Cadence was casting her gaze out the window of her room, though sadly her mind was hardly on the magnificent vista sprawling out before her purple eyes. A personal matter had been weighing heavily on her newlywed alicorn's mind. She let out a frustrated sigh, turning away from the window. Cadence softly walked over and gingerly flopped onto the bed, resting her head along with the plush pillows. Her thoughts began turning to her honeymoon with Shining Armor. Following their wondrous wedding, the two spent a week together in Las Pegasus. It was a glorious time. Her stallion had done an amazing job pleasing his mare. Well, almost an amazing job. His performance in bed was more than satisfactory. Her husband was a great kisser and always seemed very loving and attentive. Still, an annoying little fact in the back of her mind ate at the princess. She sat up on the bed and expelled another frustrated sigh. Shining Armor was the perfect gentle colt, and she couldn't fault him as a lover. Nevertheless, there was one major issue that was bothering Cadence. To most ponies, it would probably not even have been a concern. It occurred to her that many couples have their problems, and for the most part, they tend to either work through them or simply overlook them. Cadence, on the other hoof, couldn't let this go. It was quite important to her. In fact, it was the key to her ultimate pleasure in the bedroom. Sadly, her husband failed to see the meaning it had for her. The princess rose from her bed and trotted over to the bathroom door. She merely glanced inside, and again she sighed heavily. The pink alicorn shook her head and quietly asked, why wouldn't he be more receptive to it? She slowly walked away from the bathroom. I guess I'll just have to accept that my fetish just isn't his cup of tea. Cadence returned to the bed and sprawled. Again her head came to rest on the pillows. There she began to ponder her fetish. It was no secret that it wasn't an overly popular one, but unlike some mares, her specific form of this fetish wasn't overly evolved. All she wanted to do was share the intimate act of peeing with her husband. The princess merely wanted to allow him to watch her, and she would also have loved and enjoyed watching him. And if they would be able to watch each other go at the same time, well, the mere thought left her feeling giddy and partially aroused. But sadly, Shining Armor just didn't seem too keen on the whole concept. It took Cadence a while to work up the courage to even mention the subject with her beloved back when they were still dating. Once the topic had been broached, he simply expressed a lack of interest in participating in such a crude activity. She was thankful that it didn't cost her their relationship for simply bringing it up, but it hurt that he seemed so uninterested. She began thinking back to the roots of this quirk. Her fetish dated back to her younger filly days. Cadence first noticed the oddly satisfying sense she got from having to hold her bladder when a bathroom wasn't readily available. Though this sensation paled compared to the pleasure of relief she experienced during urination, her body's release of endorphins often left her feeling wonderful. Cadence discovered the sensation was greatly augmented depending on how full her bladder was and how long she had to hold the contents. Just before her adolescence, the alicorn began noticing colts and how drastically different certain parts of their anatomy were from her own. On a fun day at the playground, she was privileged to witness a colt pee, and in turn, she allowed him to watch her pee as well. The fact that the two were close friends at the time seemed to heighten the overall naughty fun of the experience. She then discovered that she had a liking for it. The true pleasure didn't play in until she began growing into a mare and discovering the decadent joy of masturbation. One fateful day, she found herself having to pee beyond belief. When she finally made it to a bathroom, the intoxicating sense of relief lingered longer than ever. It left her marehood feeling tingly. Suddenly, she felt the need to pleasure herself. Cadence indulged in her body's request and worked up to a very satisfying orgasm. To her amazement, the initial release of endorphins from her peeing seemed to heighten those unleashed following her climax. Over time, she began merging the act of having to pee really bad with an accompanying session of clopping immediately after. The pleasure was epic in her mind. She so wanted Shining Armor to share this with her, because she was confident that peeing with him before making love would only add to their pleasure, as it had for her on her own. Alas, he wasn't interested. Admittedly, it was a bit of an odd fetish, but she didn't think that it was so horrible. Cadence heard of some mares and stallions that liked peeing on each other, and even more astonishingly, drinking each other's urine. Those two activities were of no interest to the princess. All she wanted was to share the intimate act with her stallion, and perhaps it would be intriguing to dangle her hoof in his stream sometime. Those concepts greatly appealed to her. In fact, the sheer intimacy of such an act seemed almost romantic to her, in an abstract way. Sadly, her depression in this matter seemed to be something she would have to live with. Cadence didn't give up on the idea of trying to persuade him at first. She brought up the matter in private conversations, and she even considered offering special favors in return for him indulging her. Shining Armor still wouldn't budge on the issue. The alicorn even thought that maybe she could change his mind by conditioning him. One time she left the bathroom door open during an instance she was sure he'd come by walking and see her. Sadly, instead of satisfying his inner colt's curiosity, he politely closed the door, assuming that she had merely forgotten to close it in her haste to use the toilet. The princess rolled over on the bed, breaking out of her train of thought. For a time, she hated herself for having this quirk. If she could overcome it, maybe it wouldn't be a problem. Shaking her head, she knew that wasn't a viable alternative. This was clearly hardwired into her mind. Whether by a misfiring neuron in her brain, or from conditioning over time, it was now a part of her. The situation might not have been so bad, but Shining Armor was away with a team of his guards settling a border dispute with 2 neighboring towns. The Royal Guard was called in to help keep the peace as tension between 2 factions continued to mount. Had her husband been there, they could have at least cuddled, made love, or even gone for a walk in the gardens. Any of those activities would have helped to free her mind of this obsession. Sitting on the bed, she noticed a tingling in her nether regions. Her bladder indicated it wanted to be emptied. The princess decided that now was a good time as any to relieve herself. There was no miracle regarding her plight destined to take place in the next few minutes. Thus, she rose to her hooves and lightly trotted to the bathroom. Even though she was alone, she closed the door, mostly out of habit. Using her magic, she lifted the lid and seat up. While mares in Equestria generally tended to sit or partially squat to do their business, Cadence found she preferred to stand. The pink alicorn backed up close to the fairly low-lying toilet bowl. She moved her tail to the side and glanced back past her cutie mark, lightly spreading her hind legs. The princess grinned at the conveniently placed mirror hanging behind the commode. It offered her a great view of the impending show. She gently sighed, slowly relaxing her muscles. In moments, a uniform stream of clear yellow-tinted liquid started squirting out from between her haunches. Cadence made sure to regulate the flow at first in order to avoid peeing on the seat. Once her aim was true, she fully released her muscles. The urine splashed into the water of the toilet, making a pleasing sound to her ears. She closed her eyes and moaned softly, savoring the pleasant sensation from unleashing the contents of her bladder. Gradually, her stream began losing power. In a matter of moments, it sputtered as she fully emptied. To break away from the story for a moment, I have to apologize for one thing. I'm not sure anybody would really mind, but when I get to the sort of sexual parts, I tend to be seductive voice go-go. This is from conditioning with the relationship with my ex-girlfriend. And I apologize if you don't like it, but that's just the way I've been developed. And continuing with the story. Cadence let out one more pleasurable sigh. Then, using her magic, she tore off a strip of toilet paper, but instead of using her magic to cleanse her dampened crescent, she took hold of it in her hoof. Then she positioned herself, allowing her forelimb to perform the task of wiping her marehood dry. The alicorn lightly rubbed the tissue along her labia and partially inside of her moist urethra. She tossed the used toilet paper into the basin and then used her magic to flush the device. She went over to the sink and washed her hooves, gazing at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes widened a little. Cadence hadn't realized that her wings had fully risen, standing at attention. After drying her hooves, she noticed a damp sensation and tingling in her nether regions. Shaking her head, the alicorn realized her peeing had once again aroused her. This time, she didn't feel inclined to indulge her body's request for sexual release. She figured all she needed was something to take her mind off of everything. That's when it hit her. Once again, she noticed that one of her best epiphanies had taken place in the bathroom. Cadence wasn't sure why, but whenever a brilliant thought would strike her mind, it often took place in the bathroom. Exiting the washroom, she carried the great idea with her. A smile formed on her face as she began making a plan. Cadence remembered a beautiful, secluded place that was a nice hour's walk away from Camelot. It was remotely located, and in all the years she used to venture it, she had never encountered any other ponies. In fact, it was a place she used to travel to when she was single. The alicorn would make a day out of her journey in the secluded, grassy, and lightly wooded spot near a breathtaking waterfall. Most of the time, she would take a small picnic lunch with her and some choice reading materials or even a sewing project. Then, after eating, Cadence would tank up on plenty of fluids. As she waited for her bladder to properly fill, she would read a book. Once the pain of holding her urine reached its apex, she would make her way to a nearby area, mostly covered by large shaggy bushes. It was an earshot of the waterfall and made the perfect place to take a relieving pee. When ready, Cadence would relax herself and add the sound of her own personal waterfall to that of the one flowing nearby. Once her business had concluded, she would often return to her picnic blanket or move away from the freshly dampened grass by the bushes and properly pleasure herself. Rubbing her hooves together, she decided it was the perfect day to make a pilgrimage to this wondrous place and relive some of the fond old memories. But then it dawned on her. This wouldn't really help her with her current dilemma. Cadence also realized how lonely she was feeling. Journeying to that secluded place alone would do little for her current mindset. Then her face perked up. She remembered at breakfast that her aunts, Luna and Celestia, had mentioned having the afternoon and evening off for once. If she wanted to spend some time with them, their schedules were wide open. Nodding her head, the princess decided to go see her two relatives. Even though having them along might hinder her chances of indulging herself, She figured the company was more important in distracting her troubled mind, and she could always slip away from them long enough to take care of her needs. The two princesses were thrilled at their niece The two princesses were thrilled that their niece decided to spend some time with them. Cadence told them about the secluded place and how it would be the